One of the most fascinating things about Newgrange is the fact that it was built in pre-metal days. The DNA inside the Irish stone door. Mystery doesn't match anything known. And what came back from that lab in Dublin was so impossible, the researchers ran it twice before they let themselves believe it. Behind a slab of carved stone older than the pyramids, sealed, shut for over 5,000 years, a body was waiting. It has a passage leading into the interior. And in that interior, human bones have generally been found in different quantities, and the genetic code locked inside its bones described a person who, according to everything modern science understands about ancient human populations, should not exist. What that single corpse is telling us is going to rewrite the prehistory of an entire civilization. The hill that hid everything. To understand what they were looking at, you need to understand where it came from. The Boone Valley in Ireland's ancient east is home to some of the oldest man-made structures on Earth. Newgrange, Nath and Dow, three massive Neolithic passage tombs built around 3,200 BC by Stone Age farming. Communities who left no written language, no coins, no maps, just stone, a staggering amount of it. Newgrange alone is 85 meters across and 13 meters tall, covered by a mound estimated at 200,000 tons of earth and stone. Its inner passage stretches 19 meters deep into the hillside, ending in a crucifer chamber, topped by a corbelled vault that has remained completely watertight for 5 millennia. No mortar, no concrete, just perfectly balanced stone, dry and silent, for over 5,000 years. Built 500 years before Stonehenge, over 1,000 years before the Great Pyramid at Giza. But here's what nobody talks about. For centuries, nobody knew any of that was inside. The entrance had collapsed. The passage was buried under soil and grass. Sheep grazed on top of it. Local people walked over it every single day without realizing they were stepping on one of the most important archaeological sites in human history. It wasn't hidden by accident. It was hidden by time. The first recorded rediscovery came in 1699, when a local landowner named Charles Campbell sent his workers to dig for building stone. They hid a massive, carved slab placed deliberately blocking a narrow passageway that led deep into the mound. The Welsh antiquarian Edward Llwyd, one of the first outsiders to enter, described it as a broad, flat stone rudely carved and placed edgewise at the bottom of the mound, the door of a cave with a long entry leading into it. They had found the door to Ireland's oldest secret. For the next 260 years, Newgrange sat in partial ruin. Visitors crawled inside. Treasure hunters dug around the edges. Antiquarians sketched the strange spiral carvings, but nobody conducted a full, proper excavation until a methodical archaeologist from University College, Cork, arrived in 1962 and didn't leave for 13 years. His name was Professor Michael J. O'Kelly. For the past few weeks, a team of archaeologists under Professor Michael O'Keely of University College Cork have been working here, the kind of archaeologist who would spend an entire day cataloging a single stone. He planned what he expected to be a 5-year dig. It took 13, and what he was about to find would shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew about prehistoric Ireland, what the stones were hiding. From 1962 to 1975, O'Keely's team carefully removed tons of collapsed cairn material, uncovering the full scale of the monument for the first time in recorded history. And what they found kept getting stranger with every layer. First came the curbstones, 97 massive slabs laid end to end around the base of the mound, many of them covered in elaborate carvings, spirals, lozens, concentric circles, chevrons, cup markings, all cut into the rock with stone tools over 5,000 years ago. These weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, planned, executed with extraordinary precision. One stone in particular, curbstone 1 at the entrance, is now considered one of the most famous pieces of prehistoric art anywhere in Europe. Its interlocking triple spirals are carved with a confidence and control that still baffles modern archaeologists. But O'Kelly wasn't satisfied with the outside. When his team finally cleared and stabilized the passageway, they found something no other passage tomb in Ireland had ever revealed. High above, the entrance hidden beneath centuries of collapsed rubble was a small, rectangular opening. Not a window, not decay damage, an engineered slot carefully constructed from purpose. Cut stone slabs positioned at a precise angle pointing toward the southeast horizon. O'Kelly called it the roof box. Nobody had ever seen anything like it. He had a theory, but he couldn't prove it until the right morning arrived, December 21st. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. On that morning, in 1967, O'Kelly stood alone, inside the chamber in total darkness. No torches, no colleagues, just him and 5,000 years of silence. As the sun rose over the ridge of the Boone Valley, a razor-thin beam of golden light pierced through the roof box, crept down the 19 passage and flooded the inner chamber with warm orange light. Professor O'Kelly, who excavated the site, discovered that during the winter solstice around December 21st, the rising sun shines for a brief period through this box. For 17 minutes, the room was completely illuminated. The stone basins glowed. The carved triple spiral on the back wall came alive with shadow and detail. Then, the light withdrew and the chamber fell dark again. He had just proven something almost nobody believed possible. A community of Stone Age farmers with no written language, no metal tools, and no mathematics as we understand it, had built an astronomical instrument so accurate it still worked perfectly after 5,000 years. But here's what most people don't know about that chamber. It does something else too. The core-belled roof creates standing waves at specific low frequencies that affect human perception, that can alter consciousness. 2 or 3 minutes inside that space at the right resonance, and you begin to feel even now that the room is doing something to you, not passive active, as if the geometry itself has a purpose. People who knew. O'Kelly said that after his years alone in there, he was never quite the same. He once said off the record that he felt like he was being watched. Not by a person, not by a ghost, by the building itself. If that alone has your mind racing, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what was sitting inside those stone basins when O'Kelly's light hit them is the part that changes everything. What he found there would sit quietly in a museum archive for over 50 years until Cassidy ran a test that nobody was prepared for. The bones, the basins, and the blood inside the death chamber. O'Kelly's team found the cremated remains of at least 5 individuals placed in large stone basins, carved from solid granite and sandstone. These basins sat in 3 recesses, arranged in a cross shape. The largest and most elaborately decorated recess, positioned to the right as you entered. The passage was the most prestigious position in the entire monument. For decades, those remains were studied for what they were. Human bone carbon, dated, cataloged, stored. The question of who those people actually were at the level of biology, of blood, of family, wasn't answerable yet. Then 2020 arrived. The team led by Cassidy and Bradley ran ancient DNA analysis on the skeletal material from that right-hand recess, and the result they were staring at was this. The man buried in the most prestigious position inside Newgrange, the person literally placed where the solstice light lands, was the product of a first-degree incestuous union. His parents were almost certainly a brother and a sister. This man, he turned out to be extremely inbred. So we could confirm his parents were first-degree relatives. So that would be full siblings or parent and child. Sit with it. Throughout all of recorded human history, deliberate inbreeding within a ruling family has only been documented in a handful of civilizations. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the Inca royalty of Peru, the Habsburg dynasty of Europe. In every single case, the practice wasn't about ignorance or accident. It was theological. These were god kings, divine rulers whose bloodlines were considered too sacred, too powerful, too otherworldly to be contaminated by ordinary human blood. And here was genetic proof that the same system was operating in Ireland more than 1,000 years before the first Egyptian pharaoh ever sat on a throne. That alone would be extraordinary. But the DNA didn't stop there. The analysis also showed that this individual was a 6th-degree relative of people buried in other passage. Tombs scattered across Ireland at Camorray and Kerrial in County Sligo, at Milan Bay on the northeast coast. That is not a coincidence. That is architecture. A family that commanded enough labor resources and political authority to erect multiple massive stone monuments across an island. A family that maintained enough social control to ensure their dead were always placed in the most honored positions inside them generation after generation. This is not a village chief who built a nice grave. This is a dynasty, a Neolithic royal bloodline, a ruling class that sealed its most divine-blooded dead behind stone doors and encoded the alignment of the cosmos into the architecture above their heads. If this family controlled the tombs, and the tombs controlled the landscape, what exactly did they believe they were, Stone speaks. Here's what makes this strange. The people who built Newgrange were not isolated engineers who happened to be good at stacking rocks. They were a civilization that understood the landscape as a living text, and they wrote their power into it in 200,000-ton sentences. Across Ireland, dozens of passage tombs have been found sealed with enormous stone slabs. Newgrange forms part of a much larger landscape of passage tombs stretching across the Buin Valley and beyond it. Not just covered, sealed, cut to fit so tightly that in many cases air could not pass through. Newgrange's entrance stone weighs several tons and was positioned with surgical accuracy. The passage behind it was designed to be entered by exactly one thing: the light of the winter solstice sun. For the other 364 days of the year, the chamber sat in absolute darkness. When the first modern explorers broke back through those stone doors century after century, the interiors were almost always intact. Corbelled roofs unbroken, carved stones, unshifted basins still holding the cremated remains of people who died before writing was invented. Now stay with this for a second. Whoever closed these doors wanted them to stay closed. Stone doesn't forget. But what none of those early explorers could have known, what nobody could have known until Cassidy and Bradley ran their analysis, was what the bones themselves were still carrying. Locked inside 5,000-year-old cremated remains was a biological message about to rewrite the story of who these people believed they were. And it pointed in a direction nobody saw coming. The code in the bone. Here's what makes this a system, not an accident. Across the ancient world, every civilization that practiced royal inbreeding did so for one reason: to concentrate divine power within a single lineage. The pharaohs didn't marry their sisters because they lacked options. They did it because their theology demanded that divine blood stay uncontaminated. In Ireland, more than 5,000 years ago, the same logic was running. A family controlled the landscape. They built the monuments. They aligned them to the sun. They buried their incest-purified, divine-blooded dead in the most sacred positions inside those monuments. Then they sealed the doors. The pattern is so specific, so internally consistent, that it stops looking like prehistoric farmers experimenting with stones and starts looking like a state religion. But the DNA has one more thing to say, and this is the part that bends the whole story. The genetic analysis showed that these Neolithic tomb builders belonged to a population almost entirely replaced within a few centuries of Newgrange's construction. They didn't fade slowly. They didn't mix in. They were displaced by incoming farmers from continental Europe. The Bell Beaker people who arrived with new tools, new genetics, new burial customs, and no knowledge of what they were inheriting. Gone. Not defeated, not converted. Gone. Their language, their names for their gods, their term for the winter solstice. The event they spent generations engineering an entire civilization around. And one of the most interesting things about Newgrange is the celestial alignment. So still very, very popular. If you go with the winter solstice, you have this sun dagger that it cuts tremendous distance all the way in to brighten up the inner chambers. It's whatever word they spoke when the light came through the roof box on December 21st, vanished from the earth. Now picture what that actually means. The incoming population walked over those monuments. They built their own settlements on the same land. They drank from the same rivers, and they had no idea that beneath the grass-covered hills around them lay the sealed chambers of a dynasty that had once ruled this island with theological precision. When later peoples invented their own stories about Newgrange, they called it a fairy mound and imagined it as a home for supernatural beings. They had no memory of the people who built it. They couldn't even tell you what those people had looked like. The man in that stone basin, whose incest-born body was placed where the solstice light falls. We don't know what he was called. We don't know what his people called themselves. We don't know which of the cremated remains in that chamber were his parents, and which were his cousins, his uncles, his children. The DNA Cassidy and Bradley extracted is the only voice they have left. And what it says is that the ground we are standing on is older, stranger, and more deliberately engineered than anyone realized. The portal and the promise. Now picture what that actually means. The real question was never what was behind the stone door. We know what was there. Cremated bones, stone basins, spiral carvings. Newgrange is what archaeologists refer to as a passage tomb. It has a passage leading into the interior. And in that interior, human bones have generally been found in different quantities. The last biological traces of a royal dynasty that controlled Ireland before the Celts, the Vikings, or anyone we have names for ever arrived. The real question is, why did they seal it? Why engineer a 200,000-ton monument to align with a single sunrise each year, place the remains of your most divine-blooded leaders inside, and then close the door, knowing it might never be opened again? You don't do that for a calendar. You don't do that to mark a season. You do that for a reason that matters more than any of the people involved. In Irish mythology, passage tombs like Newgrange are described as Siddha doorways to the other world, the realm of the Tata Dedan. The ancient divine beings said to have ruled Ireland before humans. The carved entrance stone wasn't decoration. It was a boundary marker between the living and the dead. The passage was a symbolic journey. You walked in as immortal. You emerged transformed, or you didn't emerge at all. Here's what makes that mythology unsettling. It survived for thousands of years among people who no longer knew who built these mounds, no longer spoke the original builder's language, no longer practiced their religion. And yet they kept telling the same kind of story. Doorways, other world beings inside, something passed down through the landscape itself, even after the people who put it there were gone. The winter solstice alignment wasn't about agriculture or calendar keeping. It was about resurrection. The shortest, darkest day of the year, the moment when any ancient farmer might genuinely believe the light was dying forever. And on that exact morning, a blade of light penetrates the sealed tomb and lands on the place where the dead are resting. That's not a clock. That's a covenant. These people sealed their kings behind stone because they believed those kings weren't dead. They were waiting, and the door was sealed not to keep the living out, but to keep something in. Something that would stir when the right light touched it on the right morning. Nothing about this monument was accidental. Not the alignment, not the acoustic chamber, not the incest-born ruler in the stone basin, not the sealed door. Every single element was intentional. Every detail was load-bearing. So what were they building exactly? A tomb, a portal, a machine, a message addressed to someone they knew wouldn't arrive for thousands of years. And if they were right about any of it, the door is still doing what it was built to do right now, tonight, sealed and active and waiting for something none of us were ever told to expect. The light still comes right now. The chamber at Newgrange sits in darkness. The passage is empty. The stone basins are bare. The DNA of the man who once lay in the Solstice light has been extracted, sequenced, and analyzed. He has been studied more thoroughly in death than anyone who placed him there could have conceived. When the sun rises at winter solstice, flight hits the chamber for precisely 17 minutes, and some even speculate that the spirits would have used the light to leave the burial chamber. But every December 21st, the sun rises over the Boy Valley, and that ancient beam of light slides through the roof box and down the passage one more time. The light still comes 5,200 years later, exactly on schedule, exactly as designed. The DNA behind the Irish stone door tells us something that no myth, no folklore, no centuries of casual speculation ever came close to. These were not simple farmers who got lucky with geometry. They were a civilization organized around a ruling class that maintained its authority through astronomical architecture, controlled bloodlines, and the deliberate engineering of sacred space. A class that believed or needed others to believe that it was something more than human, something out of this world. They lived in a world where the winter sun going dark was not a scientific event, but a crisis. Where its return required the right architecture, the right bloodline, and the right body in the right stone basin to receive it. And they were confident enough in all of it to build it in 200,000 tons of stone, and trust that it would still be working long after they were gone. They were right. The engineering is still perfect. The alignment hasn't shifted. The DNA answered one question: who was in there? But the question it opened is bigger, older, and far harder to close. What did this civilization know that we have spent 5 millennia forgetting? Was it a prayer, a machine, a promise extracted from the universe at the exact moment of maximum darkness, that the light would come back because they had done everything right? Or was it something simpler and more terrifying? A warning, an instruction, a door they sealed not to remember but to make sure something inside it stayed where it was put. We may never know because the people who could have told us are gone, and the language they would have used to explain it went with them. What we have is the stone and the bone and a beam of light that has been arriving on schedule without interruption, without anyone asking it to. We have a genetic profile that doesn't match anything researchers expected to find. And we have an entire island full of grass-covered hills that haven't been opened yet. Somewhere out there, almost certainly, is another sealed door we haven't found. Hiding bones that haven't been read, carrying an answer that nobody currently is prepared for. Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you want to be here the moment we crack open the next sealed door and pull the next impossible result out of ancient DNA, subscribe and turn on notifications. This story is far from over.